Hello, everyone. I think that we're going to start now. Thank you very much for joining today's webinar presentation. The title is How Net Zero Energy Research Translates into Real-World Applications. We will discover today how mapping of scientific publications and patent data to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, can provide insights to enable the identification of emerging sustainable technical trends. My name is Anne Le Tournier. I'm a Business Development Director at LexisNexis IP. And before we start our webinar, I would like just to cover a few things. During the webinar, feel free to submit questions using the questions feature in the control panel. We will address them at the end. Also in the control panel, you will see a handout section, and this is where you can access the webinar slides from today's presentation. And for those who cannot attend until the end, a follow-up email with the slides and the recording from today's presentation will be sent to you by tomorrow. So now I first would like to introduce our presenters. Today we have Jörg Welwick from Elsevier. He's a senior research analyst. He focuses on analyzing the research performance and trends for public agencies and academic institutes. He has worked on special projects for a variety of clients, including the European Commission, the Dutch Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Policy, the Welsh government, the Indian Department of Biotechnology, and the Association of African Universities. Dr. Welwick holds a PhD in chemistry from Georg August University, Göttingen in Germany, with subsidiary subject communication theory and publicism. His vast experience and thorough knowledge come from working with higher education establishments, pharmaceutical companies, and other corporations, as well as governmental institutions. Also joining Jörg, I have my colleague William Mansfield, who will also participate to this webinar. Will is the head of consulting and customer success for the Americas and EMEA. Is responsible for overseeing the negotiation, creation, and delivery of global consulting work, along with managing the customer success team. He works closely with numerous international and Fortune 500 companies to ensure effective deployment of patent analysis for business strategy, M&A due diligence, portfolio management, and other use cases. Will has an economic background and experience in market and R&D strategy in the semiconductor industry. Thank you again, everyone, for attending today's presentation. And with that, I will turn it over to Jörg. I hope I pronounce it right.
Thank you, Anne. Yes, it's totally fine. Hello to all. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Happy to speak today and to discuss with Will about net zero and why it is relevant, and how we can combine different aspects of research outcomes like publications and patents into insightful analysis. To set the scene, first answer the question, what is net zero and why is it relevant at all? As a definition, net zero refers to a state in which greenhouse gases going through the atmosphere are balanced by removal out of the atmosphere. It is clear that we need to reduce the emission of carbon dioxide at least by 2030, or by hoping to get net zero by around 2050. So it is relevant. we all know that it is relevant for the Sustainable Development Goals as well, which we cover at a later stage today. But achieving these reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 will require rapid development, deployment of clean energy technologies. And research is essential to the success of this clean energy transition. Research outcomes can help track these outcomes, success indicators. So what we want to cover today is really how we can track the outcomes, how we can follow this, how we can measure it, and make really help us all driving towards net zero in the future. Next slide, please. For that purpose, Elsevier did recently published a report on the pathways to net zero, the impact of clean energy research. This report was designed to support evidence-led policy decisions and actions by providing a snapshot of the research. And that is not only aimed at governmental institutions, it's aimed at corporate institutions, at academic and higher education institutions, funding bodies. All of them are really interested in measuring the success of on the pathway to net zero. So we launched a year ago the Sustainability Science Hub, where a collection of articles and tools can be accessed, starting with an early report from 2015 throughout various reports and other content assets that are hosted on this hub. And the most recent one is actually the Pathways of Net Zero, which we will cover today in a snapshot of a couple of slides, not going into the full details of all analysis in the report, but really focusing on the, let's say, complementary aspects of patents and publications in research. Next slide, please. Starting from the inputs over to the outputs. The outcomes and outputs we will see later, but starting with the inputs, the first and major input of research is always money. So it is expected in a recent report from the International Energy Agency from earlier this year that the investments in clean energy will rise within the next 10 to 15 years up to $5 trillion, which is an increase of more than 3 times the current budget. And by 2050, it will remain almost at the same level of $4 to $5 trillion. So there is a huge amount of money that needs to be spent, and that will most likely be spent on clean energy, on this net zero pathway. And not only corporate and higher energy institutions play a major role in that, it's as well the governments, because they need to enable this investment-led growth. And in the end, ensure that the benefits are shared by all. Benefits are not only more employees, more workforce, or a bigger workforce. It's as well really the individual outcomes and the benefits for us all. So next slide, please. Starting with the inputs, budget as mentioned, now moving on to the outputs. There are 2 major things that we will cover today, publications and patents, more or less 2 sides of the same coin. One part, I'm focusing really on the publications, and what we have seen in the past years is that from 2001 up to 2020, the publications are rising a lot. We see annual trends a bit later, but as a overall, across the overall period, what we see is that China is by far the major contributor to net zero publications. Almost 24%, which is the green bar, almost 24% of the global output on net zero are published by Chinese institutions and Chinese researchers. followed by the United States with 17%, and then India as the third biggest contributor already with 6%. This is in contrast to the overall global output across all subject areas. China holds 14 to 15% of the global output, but obviously they are really focusing on net zero publications, not net zero research. That is what we see in these trends. So the gray bar is the global output across all subject areas. Green is only limited to net zero energy output. China has overtaken the United States in the global output per year in 2019 only, but they already overtook the United States in annual outputs in 2012. We see that in a later stage as well. So that is an almost exponential increase in publication output. And the question is how that relates to the patent outcome. So Will can talk about the patents.
Yeah, I mean, Jörg, cheers for the intro and the writing on what is net zero and why this is important. I think there are a lot of similarities between what we see there in the publications and what's in the patents as well. I mean, particularly seeing that China has this majority share when we look at the number of patents, the publication outputs from them as well. I think a lot of people will know that over the past years, the filing activity from China is ginormous. Anyway, they have been increasing in all areas. So to see them maybe leading in this area is in terms of portfolio size, the number of active patent families is not necessarily surprising. I think maybe what is also a good measure that's on the slide is the percentages at the end there, that we can see that the share of net zero patents compared to the total Chinese portfolio is 6%. And actually, as we look down, there are fairly similar numbers. Japan is a little bit lower, US is a little bit lower, Korea is slightly higher, but hovering around the same level. So in terms of the kind of commitment to that as a share of all of the patenting activity, it's quite similar across all of the major countries that we cover in the analysis here. I mean, maybe something that isn't directly here is that whilst China has this equivalent percentage to the others, that and has this massive lead in terms of number of patents in the space, that percentage is actually declining over time. Their output is continuing to increase even in this area, but the overall output in terms of patenting activity from China is increasing at an even faster rate. Thus, that 6% is actually declining over time. And portfolio size, number of patents, number of publications is one way of measuring this. But I mean, we can see that the number from China is quite out of proportion to the others. And so often the question is then, what is the value, what is the quality of those patents? And that's obviously something that at LexisNexis IP in Patent Site that we have been doing for a long time. So if we move over to the next slide, then we can then see not just the size of those portfolios of the different countries. So on the right hand side here, the patent view. We can see again, China is the furthest one out. We can see them right over there on the right hand side. But I mean, the average quality, as with most of the Chinese portfolio, is below the global average. The global average here is 1, the dotted line. So we can see that whilst they have a big portfolio in this space, it's certainly not the strongest. I mean, given the size of this portfolio, it does have a quite large patent asset index, the cumulative strength of all of the patents within that portfolio, sheerly because of the size of this. I mean, when we consider even the other players in the other countries or regions in Asia, Japan, Korea, they have smaller portfolios, but with a higher average or above average quality. But then really the US, France, Germany, Canada, the UK having these smaller still, but much higher quality portfolios. And if we look at the US, for example, the bubble size, the pattern asset index is somewhat equivalent to that of China's, but the makeup there is completely different. The makeup of much fewer patents with a much higher quality, so much more selective in terms of what is being patented, and only maintaining those patents that are really of a higher value. And in these countries, we can see that, you know, net zero research and patents are, you know, very much above average. They are the kind of already stronger technologies and emerging technologies that are there. And I think, you know, similar, slightly different, but on the publication side as well. Jörg.
Yep. On the left-hand side, we see on the publications almost the same picture. So in the x-axis, that is the what we call relative activity index. So what is the share of publications in net zero across the whole portfolio of publications against the global average at 1, and on the y-axis the citation impact of publications, so more or less the quality of the publication. And we see a similar picture. China is in terms of output, the bubble size, worldwide leading, as we have seen in the previous slide as well. The activity is much higher than most of the other countries, only outpaced by Korea and India, or India at the same level, but Korea is even more focused on net zero research. But the quality, the citation impact of China, Korea, India is still lagging a bit behind. And as well, Japan is still lagging behind the global average. Leading countries are the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Italy, Germany. So similar picture as in the patterns we see in the publications, a huge portfolio, a huge number of publications, maybe a focus on net zero, but the impact is still lagging behind. It is increasing with these trends there, but it still needs obviously a bit of time to keep up the pace and the impact of, let's say, United States, UK, or Canada. And the next slide. This is what I mentioned earlier already. These are the annual trends in publications. What we see is China ranked at number 1. So you see the ranks in terms of what is the publication output. China is the leading country, and they overtook the United States, the light blue line, in 2012 already. China has jumped from 2013 on the 3rd place in the most recent year, 2013, 2014, and now they are the 3rd biggest contributor to publications. What is maybe even more interesting than the ranking is just the bubble size in this chart, because that really reflects the annual increase in publication output. And if we see the bubble for China growing from 2011 to 2020, that is a very steep increase in terms of output, whereas most of the other countries are more or less stable. The United States remains on a high level. They are a strong and big contributor of research publications. Germany, UK, the other countries are increasing slightly their portfolio, but they are not as showing a steep increase as China did. And I'm pretty sure that patterns will reflect that as well.
Yeah, I mean, indeed. I mean, we can see, I mean, the coloring here is the same across the 2 charts. So the dark blue line for China, which is quite easy to pick out from the set. I mean, this one that beelines basically across the chart from being the second to bottom to the top, basically over the period. I mean, the period of the two charts is a little bit different. So the right hand one, this is 20 years. The left hand one, this is 10. But I mean, even considering the just the right hand portion of the chart, it seems like the kind of position China has in terms of publications, that kind of, at least in output, leading position was reached much sooner than maybe it is if we look at the right hand side, right? And I think something else that's probably interesting when looking at between the two analyses, as well as is the position of Korea. I mean, certainly when we look at their patenting activity, this is the light yellow line on on both sides, but on the right hand side, going from the fourth from the bottom position to the fourth from the top position over the time period, this quite significant increase, almost akin to China's over the first decade, and has tapered off to some degree, still significantly increasing, but tapered off over the more recent decade. That is maybe slightly different from the publications as well, which is quite interesting. I mean, certainly we can imagine who the players for that might be, and we'll look at in the following analysis as well. But I mean, we can see a kind of similar trend here across a lot of the players. That is that there is maybe a bit more activity, a bit more growth, at least trending in the first decade to the second that we cover in terms of patents, which is somewhat surprising that has tapered off for a lot of the countries that we look at there. I mean, in terms of the players, I mean, you won't be too surprised to see on the next chart. So this is on the right hand side, some of the top corporates or the contributors for net zero energy patents. I mean, it's I guess it's not a big surprise to see, say, Samsung SDI and LG Chem, both of these being battery manufacturers, right? And this is one of the major contributing factors for them to be included here. They are, I guess, relatively specialized businesses as well. So if we look on the right hand chart, the green bars, this represents the portfolio size, the number of patents each of these entities have in net zero patents, and the blue dots, this is then the share of the portfolio. Similarly, that we looked at with the countries, right? How much of their portfolio is within net zero, and we can see for LG Chem, for Samsung SDI, the blue dots are very much to the right at the kind of 50-60% range, and being more specialized companies in areas that are included within the scope of the searches used to define the analysis. They have these quite high shares, and very likely that technology and the focus on developing it in recent years, and Korea's focus on that as well, is very much leading the last analysis that we looked at as well. I mean, there are some other similar components in there. I mean, Panasonic and Bosch, there are heavy contributions from battery technology within there that's leading them to be within our analysis here. But there are others. I mean, I think people know Toyota's early contribution to non-fossil fuel or reducing the use of fossil fuels in cars. So there is a strong lead from them in this area, and we can see it's a large share of their portfolio, and that's true across automotive as well. If you look at them, they have a strong lead in this space. And then there are those like State Grid and GE at the bottom, which are a few contributing factors, but I mean, wind energy in that area plays a significant role. And the Chinese Academy of Sciences, which whilst not a corporate, obviously has a large patent portfolio, and it is fairly diverse as well, covering a number of research areas. So there is in there all kinds of things. So reduction in fossil fuel usage, biomass, solar, even nuclear to some degree, which is also included within the search. I mean, I guess there is some some overlap to the publications as well, but I mean also different companies there as well, right?
Yep. So the only company from the top leading patenting companies are two, State Grid Corporation of China and Samsung, who made it in the top 9 of the corporate institutions by publication output. But what we see is, again, this pattern of output versus impact. The publications figure shows the number of publications, research publications, so academic publications in scientific journals, and the color coding indicates again the quality, the citation impact of these publications. What we see is that the 3 major contributors from China, State Grid Corporation, China Electric Power Research Institute, and Guangdong Power Grid Corporation, will lead, will have a very strong contribution in terms of publication output, but the impact still lags behind the global average, which may be simply due to the fact that it's rather local publications as well, relevant for the local market, so to say. That could be a reason as well for this low citation impact, but they are picking up. And still the overall publication output is, I would not say low, it's small, but it's compared to some of the academic research institutions, it is pretty low. Chinese Academy of Science has let alone 37,000 publications on net zero. CNRS in France has over 20,000 publications on net zero in this 10 years time period. So corporates do play an important role, but maybe they should pick up more in terms of research institutions, or they are simply focusing on the commercialization activities within net zero, which would be fine as well in terms of reaching net zero. What is interesting is the impact that these publications have for some of the players like Samsung, like IBM, which are leading by the citation impact, but as well other players who did not appear at all earlier, like VTT Technical Research Center of Finland, which is among the top 10 in output, but as well showing a huge citation impact. So these publications, this research VTT is doing, has a huge impact on the scientific community. It is cited and being referred to quite frequently. And then the next slide, please. Coming from the contributors, from institutions, countries, more into the technology areas. This is a very rough overview of technologies, at least for the publications. Patterns are a bit more granular and a bit more sophisticated, but the publication trends are really rough. I grouped the publications according to the technologies, batteries, bioenergy, energy efficiency. You see the legend. What is interesting to see, again, the growth patterns. So bioenergy has seen a steep increase in publications from 200 in 2001 up to more than 2,000 in 2020. So it's in logarithmic scale. It is an exponential growth. The only technology area that we see is more or less stable is nuclear power. Nuclear power encompasses not only nuclear power as we would understand, but as well fission technologies, fusion technologies. that one is relatively stable, which might be reflective of some political discussions within the participating countries. I'm German, so obviously I'm thinking about the political decision of stepping out of nuclear power. But trends may be reflective of these environmental changes within the political agenda, within governmental directions and so on. And I would be curious, I'm not sure whether we see that in the patenting area as well. I would assume it's more around the corporations, but I'm not 100% sure about that.
So, I mean, we do see a similar trend for nuclear, for example, on the patenting activity. I think that's something that we can definitely pick out there. It's not identically colored because there is a very slight difference in definition here between the two. But I mean, similarly colored line on the right, the kind of brown one that is again stable across. But maybe speaking more broadly on the technology definition here. I mean, on the patent side here, the different technology descriptions that are there in the legend. I mean, these are basically the subcomponents, the searches that make up the definition for net zero that we are using here. And obviously some of these are, more well defined than others. Solar energy, for example, wind energy. Whereas others are maybe a little bit broader to capture everything around that technology space. So, for example, GHG, greenhouse gas emission reduction, for example. And I would say the interesting trends in here as well. I mean, like Jörg and I already mentioned, the kind of static nature of the nuclear energy trend that research and the patenting activity obviously continues at that rate, but there is no growth there, which, like I say, could be reflective of general public opinion. And I would say the other interesting trend here is that we see for like the first decade here, the first half of the analysis, there is a quite clear upward trend from solar, from wind, from biomass. That then after around 2011 kind of levels off. I mean, knowing something about the solar industry, I would immediately think that if it was just that maybe this was from the kind of price collapse in the industry that happened around that time. But it is somewhat surprising that the others have a similar effect, and maybe something similar driving that in those industries as well. But I mean, for most of the technologies here, we can see, I don't know, some level of upward trend, but particularly in the last decade is not necessarily not as strong as it could be. I'd say the strongest trend in there looks to be from the greenhouse gas emission reduction, which is really, around capturing outputs before they are output, basically, which, many of the technologies in there could be considered more shorter term, immediate solutions to the goal of reducing outputs, rather than longer term permanent solutions to the idea of net zero as Jörg defined it in the beginning. Yeah, I mean, could be a better view from that point, I guess. But yeah. And so then the other point to look at here, Jörg, as well.
Yeah, because maybe kind of a bridge between the publications and the patents directly is what we call research levels, or some of you may know it under research maturity. So that's actually, I would see it as kind of a deployment. That what we see here, we can map publications to different levels of research, ranging from very basic or even blue sky research without any technological impact at all at the beginning, because the dark blue line at the bottom, then over applied research, going more into engineering, technological mix, so really kind of how to commercialize things, and then in the end really towards the applied technology, which is, I would say, really the deployment of technologies. And what we have seen in the past 20 years is where engineering, technological mix, and basic scientific research remains at the same almost stable level. There is a switch from applied research towards applied technology. Applied research has declined over the past 20 years quite dramatically, from 32% to below 20%, whereas the applied technology, which is really about how can I transfer, how can I commercialize research, has increased from 42 up to more than 60%. So maybe that's a sign for this deployment, for this commercialization of research publications into the corporate landscape, into the patenting world.
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting trend, and hopefully then something that we see, you know, handed over to the patenting growth as well. So, I mean, that's somewhat an overview of kind of what is within the or the kind of common areas between patents and publications that are within the net zero report that Jörg mentioned at the beginning. But I mean, this is also in itself an output of a wider initiative as well that both Jörg, myself, Elsevier, and LexisNexis have been quite active in, and it was mentioned at the beginning, and that's this United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So we talked about very briefly the technologies that are within there. And actually how we defined net zero for this case was very much leveraging the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So both Elsevier and LexisNexis IP have a mapping that's deployed, that's accessible, showing which publications or which patents are mapped to the SDGs by technology or by the SDGs themselves. And within that mapping, this covers quite a range of technologies and topics, but two of those within here is this affordable and clean energy, SDG 7, and climate action, SDG 13. And so the definitions here that we use for the analysis that you've seen is a subset of this search, is a output of a segment of this overall mapping that is available. And just to give you a sense of scale for the overall mapping that exists, and this is particularly for patents. This is an overview of all of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, all 17 of them, and the technologies that we have mapped to them in terms of the patenting activity. There are for sure some in terms of patents that we have not mapped to any patents to. So 8, 10, and 16, so decent work, economic growth, reduced inequalities within amongst countries, peace, justice, and strong institutions, and partnership for the goals, which aren't directly technologically driven, and so there are no patents mapped to them. Of course, for the publications, there is a slightly broader opportunity there, as publications cover not just technologies but slightly more than this. I think there's still no mapping to partnership for the goals, because this is more conceptual than anything else. But I mean, this is a huge amount of work that's gone in to allow quite simple analysis, quite clear view on which technologies are driving towards being sustainable, and sustainability is becoming a huge topic. for many types of institutions. I think Jörg, on your side, then this is yeah, coming first, basically.
Yeah, it is a huge topic for many global bodies, world organizations, like definitely the UN, the major driver of the UN SDGs, but as well local governments, national governments, funding bodies implemented almost the SDGs. We have the signatories of the Sustainable Development Goals. We have countries like Germany, UK nations, like you see Wales being here. The Welsh government was actually the first global government to include a statutory position for the Minister for the Future Generations, or the minister. It's not called Minister of Future Generations, but it's actually that position. So they have statutory bodies to look at the progress of on the path of the Sustainable Development Goals, and the same do funding bodies like the UK Research Innovation, local government bodies. The European Commission has embedded the SDGs in their funding scheme. So all of them have really embodied and endorsed the SDGs, and they are in the requirement now to track the progress on that.
Yeah, I mean, and it's similar for corporates as well, right? So, I mean, I think with the addition of the SDGs to the patent site product, the corporates that we have spoken to before and during and currently around this, it seems like pretty much everyone that we talk to, this is a hot topic within their organization, that they need to report on this, not just internally, their own activity, not just as a company, but even departmentally, about how they are contributing to becoming more sustainable, but also outwardly towards their customers, their employees, their investors. I mean, we've done quite some research into, what are the major frameworks that are used to talk about sustainability, which is very frequently, most frequently, the Sustainable Development Goals. But also there's a lot of research talking about how consumers, employees, investors, the majority of 70 to 80% of would much rather deal with sustainable than non-sustainable companies, and they are actively looking to work for, buy products from those that are. And that, of course, leads also, investment firms to also be interested in this. And to be honest, from the LexisNexis IP side, I mean, that's where, our discussion on this topic really started, talking with investment companies, talking with them about patent data as an alternative metric that they could use for assessing investment decisions, and became very clear quickly that this was a good guide, a more objective guide to be able to say what a company is really doing. And then beyond that, within this context, is a company really investing in sustainable technology and doing what they say that they are doing or not? So it becomes a really important topic for sustainable investment and assessing this as well. So across, almost every industry and organization type, sustainability and the SDGs become a really, really important framework to look at. I mean, of course, we ourselves, RELX, so the umbrella company that sits above Jörg and myself, above LexisNexis, above Elsevier, has been active in this space for a long time, being a signatory to the UN Global Compact that is a precursor of the SDGs, and both LexisNexis and Elsevier, we actively contribute to initiatives within this space, such as the LexisNexis Rule of Law Foundation, and aim our, what we can do as unique contributions to have a positive impact, leveraging our skills, our knowledge, our resources to further these objectives. And particularly the SDGs, they provide this extremely clear framework that allows us to be, quite clearly guided as an organization, and also within the work we do, mapping the patents and publications to this, to also allow our clients to gauge themselves, their competitors, their industries, their countries against this very strong framework. And of course, not just being a signatory, but also, as Jörg mentioned, there are a lot of resources that we as an organization put out there to allow people to have access to see the impact that's being had in this space by different organizations, by different technologies. And it's something that's a clear message across our organization to support and further. And I mean, there is then a clear view on how important sustainability is, and how interested many organizations are within this topic. But also, I think it's important to talk about why patents and publications particularly are such a good guide for looking into this topic of sustainability and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I mean, I mentioned briefly already that the United Nations SDGs, they have this extremely powerful framework. There are these clear goals that the 17 that we mentioned that need to be achieved. There are targets that say, okay, this is what we need to do in order to achieve these goals. There are then indicators that say whether those targets are achieved, and there's a whole body of metadata and policy guidance supporting those targets and indicators to give guidance and context around what should be included and what should not be included. So in terms of say the patent mapping that we have done, that is such a strong framework to say, okay, these are the technologies that are included, and these are the technologies that are not explicitly included. And in terms of the patent mapping, we followed that very strictly, very rigidly. So our expertise, our contribution to this is saying, these are the technologies, these are the topic areas that the UN says are important, and then our contribution is, okay, how does that look like if we define that in terms of patents? So really just the patent definition of these topics that are defined by the UN, and in that way, trying to be very, very clear and transparent about what's in there. But I mean, often with sustainability or SDG reporting, there's a lot of issues with greenwashing or unclarity that exists, that organizations are not always transparent with what they say that they are doing. I mean, certainly within our experience now of looking up a lot of corporates with relation to the SDGs, there are many. Most speak about the SDGs in their, say, corporate sustainability reports, but most again don't provide clear evidence or clear guidance on how they calculate or are able to say the things that they do in those reports. And so by looking at patents or publications, this gives us and the UN SDGs, this gives us an extremely strong way of saying we are active and actively contributing to this space. So, I mean, it becomes extremely measurable. We can say, what actually are the technologies, what actually are the topics, what actually are the patents or publications within there. This mapping and patents per se and the UN SDGs are extremely transparent, what is included and what is not included within that space. We are able to say, what is the contribution, not just in terms of numbers, as you've seen with say, China at the beginning, but also the quality and the cumulative strength, the total impact that those patents or publications are having in not just a quantitative but a qualitative metric. and both of these are accessible through software that allow any amount of analysis in terms of, you know, who are the players, what are the regions, the topics, the even inventors or authors that are contributing to this space, to really make this being able to say what are the organizations that are actively contributing extremely clear. And so, I mean, maybe in somewhat summary here, that the UN SDG goals, they provide this extremely strong framework and roadmap to global sustainability. This is the goal that they are setting out, the purpose to reach, basically. I mean, this allows you know, us, investors, stakeholders, to more effectively assess what is actually contributing to the SDGs and if it's contributing to sustainability generally. Using the patents and publications, this data source, basically, this objective and, you know, impartial. You know, the patents and publications have a different means, a different purpose than this per se, but it provides us a more clear window into the activities that organizations are undertaking. We're able to measure this, to give it a clear score, to say, you know, is this above or below average? Is it better or worse than others? Is the industry moving in the right direction? And yeah, and actually deliver this in a clear way to, you know, our clients, your stakeholders, clients and investors, to be able to have a clear output and yeah, a strong result, basically. So that is the last main slide in here. I mean, we said we would look for any questions that come in during the presentation as well. I mean, if anyone wants to or has any other questions to contribute, then please do ask them in the chat that's available on the GoToWebinar panel, and we can address them. If we don't get round to all of them, then yeah, we will always follow up with you and give you an answer. But there are a few that are in there. And one question that is here is around the topic, Jörg, that you were talking about with nuclear and the inclusion of the definitions. I mean, the question per se, I think, is asking about if nuclear is included on both sides, which is, I guess, something that we did talk about briefly, and that it is included in both aspects. I mean, the definitions as well is something that we talked about, this close link to the UN SDGs and the definitions there for 7 and 13 is how we come to the point of saying, you know, what is relevant for net zero. So basically leveraging this framework, right? I mean, you can also speak about the logic there, Jörg, maybe.
You're completely right. So publications and patents do speak slightly different language. So the approaches are slightly different, but in the end, all are mapped really to the outcomes of the SDGs, and we did so with the publications. So we took the definitions from the SDGs 7 and 13 and transferred them into set queries, which is the usual approach in a publication-based approach. And these cover nuclear power. As we have seen on the slide, nuclear was included, so it is included. And although the approaches are slightly, or the results in patents publications are slightly different, the approach is the same. And we are not talking about the same things, it is different, but both are complementary, looking from two different sides on research outcomes from publications, from patents. And so, yes, both are comparable, I would say.
Yeah, I think obviously, like you say, there does need to be a different a slightly different approach. Like we would not take, say, the search for nuclear and just from publications and apply that to patents. I think for sure this would not give us ideal results. And so they have been developed somewhat independently with the same scope in mind. But I think looking at these two aspects together, we can see, well, on one side, a kind of expectation, right? Is one leading or trailing, and what is the reason for that? But also the differences, right? Those that are focusing maybe on commercializing that technology, or maybe the core development of the topic itself.
There is another question, one question on the publications, one on the patents for me. Answer first, very briefly, the question on publications. Is there any prevalent concept of effect of local publications and scientific publications? So yes, we do cover local publications. And we see sometimes local publications not being cited as effectively on a global scale. So there are local effects, increased content, rather local audience to be addressed by these publications, which may affect the impact, not affecting the output, but the impact. So there are effects, yes, but this is a usual approach in bibliometric analysis, so I think that's fine. And the question attached to that as well is, what would we see in Germany with the now green new government? Will we see an expected growth of publications? That would be a question for a crystal ball. We simply don't know. I don't think so, because research is long-term focused and not very short-term. There must be a very strong driver that we see short-term effects, like setting up a completely new big funding stream. Then we will see effects in 2 or 3 years on publications, but not earlier.
So, I mean, maybe we just have one final question, and maybe this question on the mapping again, like how this was done technically. And I think from both a publication and a patent point of view, it's extremely important here in the mapping to use not just classifications that exist, like the IPCs on the patent side, but also searching through the words. I mean, for sure, I know this for sure for patents, but I assume also for publications, not every single document was manually reviewed. But actually we do samples and high level analysis to look for things that maybe seem out of place. And I think, you know, even if every single document was reviewed, even if we had say an expert in solar sit down and decide this is or is not a solar patent, I'm sure if we got a different expert in that field, he would come up with a different definition for what is in or out. Do you include, how far do you go when you include metal pastes? Do you include them? If they're used for other applications than just solar, if they have wider semiconductor purposes, should we include them or not? I mean, it becomes a challenge at some point. So there, of course, would be some, you know, you might say noise, but I mean, it's differences in definitions as well. So I mean, it is a larger scale search and analysis leveraging the actual words in order to do that, I think, on both sides, basically. Is that right, Jörg, as well?
Yep.
Okay, so I mean, there are a couple of other questions, but I mean, we will give feedback on those. But as we come to the time, then I just want to say, yeah, thank you very much for everyone for joining. Thank you very much, Jörg, as well for contributing your time and the report in general, which I think is fantastic. Right, I'm really happy to see Elsevier doing this, and I'm very happy that we were able to contribute to some degree to this as well.
Thanks.
Yeah, the links to that are in the material as well, that's in the handout and would be shared with you all. And if you want to know more about SDGs from the IP side, then we have the address on the screen as well. So yeah, thank you everyone, and have a super day.
Bye.